All right. Barbara Coloroso is an international best-selling author and educator, and for the past 53 years, an internationally recognized speaker and consultant on parenting, teaching, school discipline, positive school climate, bullying, grieving, nonviolent conflict resolution, and restorative justice. She is the author of six international bestsellers, including the latest edition of The Bully, The Bullied, and The Not So Innocent Bystander, and Extraordinary Evil, A Brief History of Genocide and Why It Matters. She has appeared on CBC, CTV, Global, BBC, Oprah, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, and NPR, and has been featured in the New York Times, Time Magazine, Globe and Mail, Newsweek, and other national and international publications. And I can't thank you enough, Barbara, for joining me today. It's so great to have you.
It's really a joy, Tegan, to discuss work that I'm really passionate about.
I you're amazing at what you do. And actually, we were just talking before recording about how I found out about you and your work. I did a podcast about a year ago with a gentleman named Dr. Gregory Stanton, who is the founder of Genocide Watch, and I learned so much. It was an amazing conversation, and he actually had told me about your work and that you were doing similar work. And then I saw some TED Talks you were doing. I saw you all over the news, and you're one of the very few people, aside from Dr. Stanton, that I have heard even comparing how bullying gets into hate crimes, which gets into genocide, and how those are familiar. And the reason I got into contact with Dr. Stanton in the first place was I'd had a similar experience to a much smaller degree in the workplace. But I realized that a bullying situation, it's just it's on a small scale of what, hate crimes or genocides are. And so, Barbara, can we talk a little bit about your work? And like, what is bullying anyhow? Like, what can we talk about schoolyard bullying and what that looks like?
And it's interesting because you said schoolyard bullying.
Hmm.
When my book first came out, it was mostly about schoolyard bullying, but I did bring up in the edition that workplace bullying and adult bullying on the political sphere is happening. However, when I wrote my book on genocide after my work in Rwanda with the orphans from the 94 genocide, I caught a lot of grief in 2007, 8, and 9 about how dare I call a genocide bullying, which is not what I did.
Right.
Um, but understanding what bullying is. Bullying is a conscious, willful, deliberate, hostile activity intended to harm, where the perpetrators often get great pleasure from inflicting pain on those that they target. And so, how that came about with connecting genocide, I was working in Rwanda with the orphans, all adolescents by that time, but all having been through a horrific genocide. And I got a phone call from the University of Butare, which is outside of Kigali, the capital, asking if I would talk to university students who were becoming teachers to talk to them about bullying. And I said, I'd be happy to,
Mhm.
because it's important that we learn it in universities and study it. I said, however, I will only come if you allow me to connect the short walk from hateful rhetoric to hate crimes to crimes against humanity, of which the greatest and most grave is genocide. Because at that university, half of the staff were responsible for the killing of the other half of the staff. And half of the student university population were complicit in the death of their classmates. So, how could I go there and talk with that kind of history without bringing it up? Well, after that lecture, it was within less than an hour that my minder, because you had to travel with a minder then, got a phone call from the president's office, Kagame, um, and said that the university had mentioned what I had said, and I didn't know if they thought it was good or bad, or would I please come visit the president. By that time, I was the known as the woman with the white hair because most of the elders had been killed during the genocide. They couldn't run fast enough. They couldn't swim. They got trapped. And so I was lecturing in a classroom, and one little boy raised his hand and he said, "How old are you?" And the teacher said, "Oh, we don't ask questions like that." I said, "Oh, yeah, we do." And I was 50 something at the time. And I realized that the reason he said that was I was very gray. And he never saw people gray because families of all generations, but especially the older generation, have been totally wiped out. Um, in 100 days, almost 1 million human beings were macheted to death. So when I came home, I was having lunch with my editor and the publisher, and I was talking to them about that encounter. And my publisher said, "I'd like you to write a book on that." So I do connect it in my genocide book, the connection between the two, because the parallels I made is conflict is to war what bullying is to genocide. And the way we in education, in fact, I think it's one of the biggest mistakes we make in this regards when it comes to bullying, is we fail to discern the difference between conflict, which is normal, natural, and necessary, and sometimes escalates to physical violence, but it's two people going at one another,
Yes.
basically, often similar in power and position, or siblings doing it. And genocide, bullying is to genocide. Often, bullying, we try to resolve it by using conflict resolution. I'll give you an example. The invasion of Ukraine by the aggressor, Russia, for the sole purpose of seizing the land and killing children and elderly, and not a military kind of thing, because often a war will cover over a genocide. Often in school, we see everything as a conflict,
Right.
and then we fail to deal with it. Conflicts you resolve, bullying you stop, and hold the person doing the bullying accountable. And there needs to be 3 R's: restitution, resolution, and reconciliation. In other words, you have to restitution. You have to own and fix what you did. Resolution, figure out how you're going to keep it from happening again. And the third is make whole the parties you have harmed. It isn't come together and let's
Right.
reconcile our differences. It's a restorative position. And often we at schools fail to see bullying for what it is, which is an act of contempt for another human being. And once I have contempt for you, believe me, I can do anything to you. Not feel any shame or compassion.
No. Yeah.
How does that even start? Remember, I said it's words, hateful rhetoric. It's the dehumanization of another human being. And they often are labeled. For instance, kids will use gross terms for an ethnic group, or for somebody of a different sexual orientation, or calling boys or girls gross names, religious groups being diminished. And kids had to learn that somewhere. Bullying is a learned behavior. You don't come out of the womb knowing it.
Barbara,
and so it is.
Sorry, please go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it is learned. So if we look at bullying as a matter of contempt for another human being, Martin Buber said, "I am I and you are thou. I'm unique and you're unique. And we have a common humanity. That's the we." Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, "We're interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. But once I see you as less than me, I can do anything to you. Matthew Shepard
Okay.
uh, was beaten and then left to die on a fence post outside of Fort Collins, having been in Laramie, Wyoming. Um,
Yeah.
and when the two young college students were arrested, they said, yeah, but he was gay.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
James Byrd in Jasper, Texas, was drug on the back of a pickup until he was dead. And when the three young men were arrested, they said, yeah, but he's black. A young girl in British Columbia, 100 kids knew about her death before the parents or
Yeah.
police. And 25 normal classmates cheered the girls on as they broke her arms before they drowned her. And one of the girls said, well, she's brown and ugly and fat. I didn't like her. And another said, oh, I can stand the sound of her voice. And another said, well, I was only doing what they told me to do, which brings up the different characters' roles that are played. But it's that contempt for another human being, seeing them as less than. And if we look in our own country today,
Yeah.
in the United States, we have this dehumanization going on from the top levels of government on down to our schoolyards,
Yeah.
and every place in between.
Yeah.
Uh, and the dehumanization that's occurring with people who are undocumented.
Absolutely.
Um, and uh, the Most of us are immigrants.
Mhm.
My family came from Ireland. My husband's family came off the boat from Italy, and the only relative in my family who can claim that he's um, not totally an immigrant is our grandson, who is part Mohawk.
Right.
And
Right.
so he takes that very proudly as
Right.
part of his heritage. But he knows that the others parts of his heritage, we were immigrants.
Right.
And so when we start dehumanizing other human beings, uh, then we fail to see them as the thou. We see them as an it. And once they're an it to me, in the genocide of the Armenians,
Mhm.
they were called dogs.
Mhm.
Jews in the Holocaust were called vermin and bacteria eating at the fabric of our society.
Mhm.
Tutsis were called cockroaches.
Cockroaches.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
Rohingya are called fleas. Cambodians were ants and cockroaches as well. And once you dehumanize them, you can kill a cockroach.
Absolutely.
You can, and so we have to begin to look at it. So when people say, well, it's just verbal bullying, I say, no, no. So that is on the beginning of the walk.
Right. Right.
And so we have to look at that. And I also studied a fascinating book called The Ethics of Memory. And the researcher studied people who had been tortured, physically tortured. And he put them in functional MRI machines. Uh, and they had two kinds of pain: the pain of the injury and the pain of the insult. And that
Mhm.
was a surprise to him because the pain of the injury will often fade unless it's been serious injury that doesn't heal, like John McCain, who
Right.
could not lift his arm very high without severe pain because of the injuries when he was tortured in Vietnam. And so the pain of the injury often fades. The pain of the insult does not go away. And so he decided to study people who had been verbally dehumanized and found an interesting thing. Of course, there was no pain of the injury because they were not physically injured. The pain of the insult was as great, if not greater, than the pain of the insult for being physically targeted.
Right.
So he thought he'd go one more step and see how about people who are isolated and shunned and removed from relationships with other human beings. And he found there was no pain of injury. However, the pain of the insult was
Mhm.
as grave, if not
Mhm.
graver.
Mhm.
then somebody physically tortured. Many young boys will say, I wish they'd have just hit me rather than
Yeah.
dehumanize me verbally. Or so we have to take, I just mentioned the three kinds of bullying: verbal, physical, and we used to call it relational in my day, and now it's social. Shunning, rumor, gossip, and exclusion. And add on to that technology enhanced bullying, and it magnifies it. Um, and so we have to take a serious look and not dismiss verbal, boys will be boys, girls just want to be mean as part of growing up. No, we have to look at when you start calling somebody a cockroach and then they hate crimes are put upon them. It is just a short walk to being able to machete them to death and not
Barbara,
feel worse and go home like the
absolutely.
Nazis went home, and had to.
Absolutely. Can I just go back and ask you a question if you don't mind? Because it's
You can
just,
ask me anything you'd like.
if you don't mind, because I had a situation in a workplace, and you mentioned that this is a learned behavior, and that because I would just love to know your sort of perspective on this. So I was in a professional situation fairly recently. It was a temporary one, and I had met a lady very, very briefly twice. And on the third occasion, this woman was probably about 60 years old. And on the third time I met her, she just came over to me and she had a big smile on her face. And she said, I've seen your videos on YouTube that you do about workplace harassment. They're great. And I said, thank you very much. And she said, you're my next target. I've driven so many people out of this job. I've lied about people and had them fired. And if you don't leave, I'm going to get a group of people together and we're going to make your life essentially a living hell. And so at that point, I thought, I don't need this that badly. You guys have known each other. I'm just going to walk away from the situation. But it was sort of painted as like this conflict, whereas I didn't know this woman from a hole in the wall. So how do the bullies, especially when they get to that age, how do they sort of pick somebody, and why do they see this as as normal behavior to do to
Because
strangers?
they normalize it. You see, when we don't stop it when they're younger, and
Right.
we don't not only stop it but hold them accountable, and then try to help them, and it's trying to help them rewrite their script, where they don't see people as less than them. They don't see others as competition with them. Because sometimes it's very popular boys or girls who are targeted as well.
Yes.
Uh, the one thing all targeted kids have in common is somebody targeted them. And that's what
Right.
we have to recognize. So this woman viewed you as a target.
And told me so. And she was
And
very happy about it. Yes. She
what
told
she
me
has
so.
not learned is healthy relationships. She hasn't learned friendship skills. How do you buffer from that? A strong sense of self. So her
Right.
sense of self was the pits. And I don't mean self-esteem, that good feeling of great self-esteem. No, a
Right.
sense of self is recognizing I have gifts and liabilities,
Hmm.
and I recognize the same in the thou, the other. And together we create a community. She doesn't know how to do that. A sense of self. The
No.
second is being a good friend. Bullies tend not to have good friendship skills. That has to
No.
be taught to them. And then having at least one good friend
Sure.
who can say to you, back off, leave that kid alone. He's not such a bad kid, kind of
Sure.
thing. And the
Sure.
last is knowing how to get in a group and how to get out and when to get out.
Yes.
Those are skills
Yes.
we have to teach kids, whether they're targeted, they're the person doing the bullying, or the title of my book is The Bully, the Bullied, and the Not So Innocent Bystander. William Burroughs said it so beautifully: there are no innocent bystanders. What were they doing there in the first place?
Right.
Good question. Because they weren't, if they're the not so innocent bystanders, they weren't standing up or speaking out or stepping in for somebody.
No.
Nobody in that group said, that's mean, that's cruel, leave her alone. She's just started work here. Nobody said that because
No.
they're probably afraid, or they feel good being a part of that person, leader.
Yeah.
Yeah. You see,
Yeah.
because there is a bully circle.
I was wondering how they determine that. Like, who is that powerful person, even if there's no evidence that they're powerful? Like, how does that even happen?
They're not really powerful. Bullies are
Right.
not real
That's
Well,
what
they
I'm
think they
saying.
are.
That's
They
what I'm
think they
saying.
are. And others often look up to them. And there are different kinds of bullies. And the one bully we often dismiss is the high status social bully
Okay.
who says to all the other girls, whether they're 5 years old, bullying starts about 4.5 with little girls, boys a little later because it's verbal bullying, but mostly that they engage in at first. Uh, you want to be in my group, or they're 15. You want to be in my group? Don't eat lunch with the new girl.
Mhm.
Now, that first character on the bully circle is the bully.
Mhm.
The second is the henchman. Now, we didn't raise her to do to please um, a bully, but we did raise her to do to please. We use scratch and sniff stickers and stars, catch and being good awards, bribes and threats, and rewards and punishments, all that interfere with ethical behavior. And I've often, uh, when we've caught a henchman, we may have thought they were the bully because they were the ones that got caught. But I look at how their parents respond. And very often a henchman's parents will say, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe my kid did that. He's always such a good kid. He got the best behavior award at school, and he's always done whatever we told him to do." He's doing to please. He did to please you first. Now he's pleasing that high school social bully who says, "Let's harm this kid in the locker room because of his race or
Yep.
religion or gender or physical or mental ability." Big
Mhm.
five for hate crimes. What makes a hate crime different than another crime? It's criminal bullying.
Thank you.
But we have to look at that person not being so strong. Um,
Absolutely.
he tries or she tries to resent that. So we have our henchman who does it. For instance, the two girls are in the lunchroom and other girls are gathered around as well. And there's an empty seat next to the henchman.
Mhm.
And the bully sees the new girl coming over and says to the henchman, "Put your lunch pail down or put your backpack down."
Mhm.
And since she wants to be in the in crowd, she does that, even though we've never taught her to do that. But it's going along to get along.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I won't even bring up Congress right now. I'll just mention it.
Right.
Going along to get along
Yep.
for lots
Mhm.
of reasons.
Sure.
So we have the henchman, then we have the active supporter. Now, she doesn't do the mean and cruel, putting the backpack down or telling the other girl to be mean. She takes out her cell phone and videos it and
Yep.
then puts it up on TikTok. She didn't bully, but she's a part of the
Bully.
problem,
Mhm.
part of that bully circle. Then right down below her is the passive supporter who hears about the TikTok, looks it up, and laughs at the pain of her classmate.
Mhm.
"Oh, but I didn't do anything." You're part of the problem. You've got a job to do. The very bottom is the disengaged onlooker, a dead late lot, who can be you and me, who says, "Oh, it's not my problem," or "She's not in my grade," or "That's part of growing up. Boys will be boys, girls just want to be mean." And um, they're as big a problem. Elie Wiesel, who wrote Night, has said that it's the silence of
Yeah.
those who did not stand out.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King said the same thing.
Mhm.
And so it's that complicity in silence. On the upswing is the potential witness. That's a kid you did raise, Zach, with integrity, civility, and compassion, but they're afraid of the bully. They're afraid if they step in, they'll be next. They're afraid if they step in, they'll make it worse for the targeted kid, or they're simply afraid. Those are valid reasons.
Mhm.
However, you raise this kid to act with integrity and civility and compassion. So they don't feel good. Their head hurts. Their gut is feeling bad about being a part of this mean group. So they have to start rationalizing.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we have lousy excuses.
Yeah.
"Oh, she's not my friend. He's not my friend. I like the bully. He doesn't target me, or she doesn't target me.
Mhm.
She invites me to her parties. Well, that kid deserved it. All these rationalizations. You
Oh
know what
yeah.
happens then?
Yep.
That headache that kid was getting in the stomach ache, poof, it's gone.
Hmm.
And they become part of that trap that Sebastian Haffner called in Defying Hitler the trap of comradeship. Now, there is a fourth character in our homes, our schools, our politics, our communities, and on the world scene. And that's the witness, resistor, and defender. The brave hearted person willing to stand up and speak out and step in and do the right thing when the burden's heavy. That little girl at 5 years old who goes and sits next to the new girl, knowing that she'll probably do that at cost. Oh, Miss Goody Two Shoes, or you're next. Or the boy in the locker room who says, back off, leave that kid alone. He's not such a bad kid. Oh, what, do you just like him? That kind of thing. But I think we have a job as educators and parents to raise a generation of brave-hearted kids who understand that bully circle, who understand the power dynamics in it. Because on a global scale, when we allow it to happen and turn a blind eye, then we become complicit in the horrors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that, and thank you for discussing the the parallels between these issues, because I used to think, Barbara, that I remember saying to myself in high school, you know, I can't wait to be 18 because then bullying is over. Like I really thought bullying was over in adulthood. And
No.
20 years later, I'm
Surprise.
seeing 20 years later, I'm seeing the exact same things. And you're right about that very short walk to a almost a physical attack, because that person who was targeting me, like I really felt that if I was ever alone with this person, it may not go well. There was a lot of hatred, and I didn't even know this person. So I can see how you're saying that the level of hatred or whatever can easily go into a hate crime or a physical. Um, yeah.
Well, and hate crimes can be verbal too.
Okay.
So, the vile
Yeah.
language, and you say, well, freedom of speech, but we don't have the freedom to be
Right.
vile and vicious.
Right.
And understanding that it can lead to a physical hate crime.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so we have to look at that and say, um, wow, where do I take a stand? Where do I say, no more, not here, never? In a classroom, when a kid calls another kid a gross name, I don't say, what did you say? I don't want them repeating it. And I
Sure.
don't say, how would you feel if somebody called you that? And they say, it wouldn't bother me. Or um, I say to them, I want to see you after school because you're in serious trouble. I just stop. I've taught kindergarten all the way through university. And I have stopped in an English class. And when I heard somebody call somebody a gross term, I just stop and start walking toward that kid. Now, everybody else in the class who's still awake in English class at the middle of the day is watching.
Mhm.
And when I walk up to that person, I don't raise my voice, I change my voice. And I look them in the eye and I say, no more, not here, never. That was mean. That was cruel. And this is safe harbor for every kid in this classroom. All the other kids know I'm not going to tolerate that kind of abuse. The girl they called the gross name to knows she has an ally right here. That what that other kid did was not right.
Mhm.
And then I say to the kid who called the other kid the gross name, I said, I want to see you after class because you have a job to do. And every kid at the beginning of the school year, and any new kid, I instruct them on this. You have a job, and it's 3 hours. You have to make restitution for what you did. You posted something online. You have to go online and write a note saying what I said was mean and cruel. If you received it, would you delete it? If you passed it on, because what I said was mean and cruel, and that kid did not deserve this.
Right.
Would you please send this message on? Humbling. And then resolution. Tell me how you're going to keep it from happening again. And believe me, I do not want to hear, I won't ever do that again.
Mhm.
That's what you won't do. I want you to tell me what you will do. And this is where our wisdom as adults can come in, where we can say, well, one of the things you do is sit in the other part of the classroom. If it was real severe and it's been ongoing, it might be take a different English class, but that's during my lunch hour. Oh, that's a bummer. You know,
Mhm.
that other kid doesn't
Mhm.
need to put up with this.
Yeah.
And then restoration, reconciliation is for conflict, restoration is for bullying. And at the behest of the targeted kid, when they are ready to sit down to hear one, that you admit what you did. I don't demand an apology. You get false apologies if you do that.
Mhm.
Um, but you must admit what you did. I called you a gross name. Sometimes that's all the targeted kid wants to hear,
Mhm.
is that you know you did it. This is how I'm going to keep it from happening again. Um, I'm going to call you by your given name. I'm going to be in the back of the class or the front of the class so you won't be bothered. Risky that I might say something because I don't want to hurt you anymore. And uh, I'd like to invite you to eat with us at lunch, something like that. The targeted kid who has listened to this can say, oh, I'd love to come to lunch and thank you for admitting what you did. Or they might say, you know what? Same thing Steve Seskin said in that wonderful song he and Alan Shamlin wrote, Don't Laugh at Me, that Peter, Paul, and Mary made famous. Don't laugh at me, don't call me names, don't take your pleasure from my pain. And the child might say, you know what? I don't want to eat lunch with you. I don't need you to sit away from me or change English. I just need you not to call me names. What you do is you empower the targeted kid and you humble, not humiliate the bully. And you work through with the parents and with that kid the steps to rewrite their script for them, giving them opportunities to do good, which really bothers people when you give somebody who has targeted another kid the ability to go down and read to second graders when he mocked the sixth grader in class. But I want to say to him, what you did was not right.
Right.
It was mean and cruel, and you don't have to be that way. And having him work with younger children or with animals or helps bring out that empathy that's kind of covered over. And so all is not lost. And the younger they are that we stop it, the better. People who say, oh, it doesn't happen in kindergarten, so you're not watching or you're seeing it as a conflict. And how often I've seen 10-year-olds who a girl will come up to the teacher and say, she told me her gross name and she tripped me in the hallway and she spread an ugly rumor online. Okay, girls, let's get together and let's work this out as if it were a
Yeah.
conflict.
Yeah.
And you know who wins
No.
that? The
The
bully.
bully, of course, of course. Now, if you don't mind me asking, Barbara, if this procedure is not done, this restorative justice procedure, if it's not caught in the younger years, are these the people bullying in their 40s, 50s, 60s, committing hate crimes, et cetera, and criminal activities
Or
in our
driving people
societies?
out of the workplace.
Yes,
It doesn't have
yes,
to be a hate crime,
sure,
but they
sure.
don't have good relationship skills. They often have leadership skills. You know, gang leaders have phenomenal
Gang
leadership
leaders, yeah,
skills.
gang leaders,
And
exactly. Thugs,
the others are those little circle
yes.
henchmen and active supporters, passive supporters, go along to get along kind of people. But they just don't have good relationship skills. They know how to wield power.
Hmm.
Um, they don't have good, healthy relationships
No,
at all.
no.
And it doesn't end. Some people can go back to their class reunion and 20 years later see that little group of middle school girls still together
Still doing the same thing
going,
20 years
really?
later.
Others have moved on, learned,
Yep.
they've been called on it when they got to university. So
Yes,
I'm very hopeful that they can be changed,
I'm
um,
too.
and that they can make, they're, especially when they're young, they're teenagers, they're you did something awful. And you need to be able to remember that's a thread in your tapestry, will always be there. You can move beyond that in your life. And that's part of what reconciliation and restorative justice is about, being able to move beyond in a horrible conflict that was ended up being a fight. But I would also say there was a research project done in the 90s, so that'll date me, where two university people did an experiment where they had people in white shirts and people in black shirts, and they were tossing basketballs, and you had to count the number of times a player with a white shirt passed to a white shirt, or in some situations, black shirt to a black shirt. It was a 75-second video. And in the middle of that video, a woman in a gorilla suit walked across the stage, pounded her chest, and walked out. 75% of the people did not see the gorilla, swore it wasn't there.
Wow.
When they were shooting it, it's called inattentional blindness.
Wow.
So, and the reason I bring this up, when I was in Rwanda, we talked about the inattentional blindness. And Romeo Dallaire, who was the UN peacekeeper, he led the peacekeeping troop. I finally got to meet him when Stephen Lewis, the UN ambassador for AIDS in Africa, was at a conference I was speaking at, and he called me up. He said, "Barbie, you want to have breakfast with Romeo Dallaire?" That isn't even a question. I went to this breakfast, and I just kind of sat there in awe of these two world peacemakers, willing to stand up and speak out and step in when it was difficult to do. Well, when Romeo was sent to be the peacekeeping leader, he was trying to get two sides together, which you do in conflict. Well, when Kagame and his ragtag RPF were ending the war, because we all in the world saw it as ethnic rivalry. It wasn't. It was a genocide. And were some Hutus killed? Yes, especially those who would support Tutsis. And so Romeo, with his group of peacekeepers, have been working on this, and Kagame said to him, "It's not a conflict. It's a genocide." And Romeo said, he put his hand to his head and said, "Oh my God, it's a genocide." You see, when you're a peacekeeper, you are to remain neutral, impartial, and work at the consent of both parties.
Right.
That doesn't work when one party is hell-bent on destroying the other.
Absolutely.
And people will say, "But you know, some Tutsis killed some Hutus." They were defending themselves. Whole villages were being wiped out. The river, you could walk across because of the number of bodies floating in the river. And so I look at Ukraine, and they fought back. They're fighting back, but they were attacked. So when we say they have a conflict, I go, you cannot look at it as a conflict. Somebody aggressed.
Yes.
And so we cannot say, "Oh, let's get the two of you together and resolve this." No.
It's not going to happen.
First of all, one has to be accountable, whether it's with the International Criminal Court, where they're held to account for what they have done. Yeah, but. Well, were there war crimes committed by some Ukrainian soldiers? Absolutely. Zelensky admitted that, the horrors of it. And there were people with the Tutsis who went on a rampage after their whole family was destroyed. And they needed to be held to account, and they were.
Yes.
But the other person, the other party, the aggressor, has to be held to account. Restitution, own and fix what you did. And it may be your billions that are frozen right now, but you have to own what you did. Figure out how you're going to keep it from happening again. and the criminal court will help with that.
Oh yeah.
And then to heal with the party you've harmed is much more difficult in a genocide, but Rwanda managed to do it by and large with a form of healing that was ancient called gachacha, where when the people, because with so many people were imprisoned that were party to the genocide, level one genocide is the most severe. Um, they were the instigators, planners, and perpetrators, not just the perpetrators, instigators and planners, which included a radio uh, uh,
Mhm.
owner who had to be extradited from Montreal, Canada,
Remember
and he
that.
kept saying, "I didn't
Hmm.
kill anybody."
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, but it took 10 years, but he's
Hmm.
in prison now.
Hmm.
Um, and, but especially the younger people, because there's always a youth group in every genocide. The younger people, what they did was horrible. Can they get on with their lives? And an example of two of the people that I had worked with, both having been orphaned in the genocide, married one another. And Isaiah was willing, when the man was released from prison who killed his parents, he was willing to sit with him and do the restoration. And the man wanted to come back to the village that he'd grown up in. And he admitted what he had done. He expressed tremendous remorse. He said, I understand if you tell me no, I can't come back to the village. And Isaiah said, I want to know where you buried my parents. That's what he needed. Now, his wife had witnessed the slaughter of her entire family, including her pregnant sister. And she said, I can't meet the people that did that. I cannot reconcile with them. And what I said to her was, you don't have to. And they can be not allowed into that village, but you have to allow them to go somewhere once they've done their prison term. And I said, the one thing that's so important to me is don't lose your caring self. Because if you lose your caring self, you want to seek revenge, you want to harm people
Yes.
that were related to them, do
Yes.
damage, then the genocidaires have won. So Kagame said to me, what do we do with people who refuse to reconcile? Use the term reconcile with those who slaughtered their families. And I said, first of all, it's not reconciliation, it's restoration. And I said that what I told Clarissa, if you cannot do it, don't lose your caring self. Go about your life caring deeply about other human beings, whatever you can do to keep this from happening again when people are speaking of cockroaches, or to be able to say, no, not here, no more. In Rwanda, they actually don't call one another Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa anymore. They are Rwandans, and that has taken years to be able to make that an ingrained part, but it took effort. And so, and the Germans have done that restoration,
Yes.
um, and what they're seeing is a rise now uh, of Nazism,
Yes.
the us versus them, and they're getting a handle on it. They recognize that it's hard. It's hard
It is.
to see, and all of us must be cautious when any group in our culture decides that another group doesn't deserve to live. Another group doesn't deserve the freedoms that we all embrace, enough food, enough clothing, and the like. Um, I I always appreciate Reverend Barber, and he got arrested again. And he has a thing, a scapula on it that says Jesus was poor. um, and then he has other ones that talk about, we go, almost every faith tradition has do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But there are two faith traditions that also have do not do unto others what you would not want done to yourself. That is not the same as do unto others as you would want done to you. It's a more powerful expression. You take those two together. So don't do something you wouldn't want done to you.
It's
And so
amazing.
we have to look at that. And when I'm working with kids who have targeted other kids, um, I talk to them about the mean and cruel behavior, not you're a bully. I use the language only in the bully circle so you can see this is a role you're playing. You don't have to
Sure.
keep playing this role. You
Sure.
can read that script. But I talk to them about um, how can you get a different frame of mind to be able to come back and view other people not as adversaries, someone to conquer, but as another human being who has gifts and liabilities. And I'm a special ed teacher, and so some of our kids have behaviors that bother other kids,
Sure.
and I have a job to work on those behaviors with that kid. But nothing justifies me. Nothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Barbara, I appreciate the work you're doing so much because in the bullying sphere, a lot of it is sort of the opposite. It's kind of going at the bullying as much. We're treating the bullies like sometimes we are the bullies. And so I think that that can happen going too overboard. So like you said, the they win if you do that. And I really appreciate that you give kids an option. You teach them a way out of that, that it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be
Yeah,
that way.
no, it doesn't have to. And we don't stop it now, you will have that experience in the workplace and also in
Yes.
relationships. If you treat others with disdain, how are you going to treat your children or your spouse?
Mhm.
You know, it matters. How do you relate to others in the larger community? It matters. And I will bring back one other thing that rarely is brought up. I'm leaving for Norway to go to
Wonderful.
the World Anti-Bullying Forum. Um, and it happens every 2 years, and it's amazing to me. I'll be speaking at it. Um, but I also enjoy listening to others because of the research that is going on all over the world. And what it also brings to mind is that it's all over the world.
Yes.
Bullying is all over the world. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it normal. It's happening
Mhm.
to our young people for to devastating effects. But when you look at that short walk, you can see we are destroying ourselves as a civilized community or country or world
Yes.
when we allow that kind of contempt for another human being. And Volpe, who's one of the leaders in anti-bullying, did a 20-year longitudinal study of sibling bullying. Because how often do we hear
Oh,
parents say,
sure.
"This fight a lot,
Oh,
this
yes.
conflict"?
Oh,
Two kids
sure.
can fight over remote control, but when
Sure.
one puts the other kid's arm behind the back, and I'm not talking a yoga pose, but hurting them with a smile on their face as they're doing it,
Mhm.
that is not conflict. And I can't tell you how often in parenting lectures when someone will come up to me and said, "My brother's still bullying me, and we're 60 years old."
Mhm.
Know, or
Mhm.
my sister runs the family and is mean to mom and dad, um, and to the rest of us, or to one scapegoat in the family.
Mhm.
So we have to recognize the dangers of sibling bullying because those kids then come to school having been targeted and their bodies are already slumping. And we say, well, look at him. He walks around like this. No wonder people talk. No, he wasn't always like that.
Right.
And we have to look at what might have brought that about. And Volpe found that kids who are bullied by their siblings, which mean then when they get to school and they're already targeted, um, they are weakened.
Sure.
And they tend to have, in the teen years, trouble with addiction, with depression, with self harm, because they feel worthless, like they have no value.
Sure.
Uh, we have to deal with the person who targeted them. One of the things when, like the girl in the classroom that called another girl a gross name, when I go later in the day to talk to the kid who was targeted, very often by middle school or high school, they'll say, Happens all the time. And I go, whoa, 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 time out.
Yeah.
Talk to me. And I'm the English teacher. So I say, let's go down and talk to the school counselor because I don't want you to ever think that this is normal, what has happened to you.
Mhm.
Yeah, but nobody ever took it seriously when I was in grade school. And my parents don't take it seriously. We have to stop that because you are a worthwhile human being. And I often have young people say when they can't get the words out to confront the bully when they're doing verbal bullying, I say, well, just put your hand up. Don't say stop. That's telling the bully what to do. Just put your hand up and then walk away and say, I'm a decent, caring human being. That girl's sure getting her needs met in a lousy way,
Mm.
which put the problem back on the other person and not eating at them. So we have to use those kinds of strategies. I just wish we didn't have to deal with it so young
Yes.
or by the time they're in high school where their roles are set,
Right.
where they become stereotyped. They become what we call a character actor. You know, if I would say to you,
Mm.
Henry Winkler, although that's you might not know who he is,
I
Henry
just the
Winkler,
name rings a bell. I'm not
the
particularly.
Fonz, with it's
Oh,
a
yes,
show,
yes,
the
yes. Okay, yes,
Fonz.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you.
Well, he's a phenomenal Shakespearean actor,
I didn't
and he
realize
writes
that.
children's books.
Amazing.
But how do people see him as the
Yeah,
Fonz?
absolutely. I had
And
no
if a
idea.
kid bullies and bullies and bullies, they may be talented in other areas, but we don't know that. We label him, we stereotype him, and he stereotypes himself.
Right,
And
right.
that can happen to a kid who's targeted. And kids can get very good at going along to get along.
Yeah, absolutely. And adults. Sure,
And all of
sure.
that has to be broken.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of the solution to that. I think your work is phenomenal. I've learned so much just from my own like adult workplace experiences. And it just kind of goes back to that. And I never thought these adults are simply people who never learned as children how to deal with it. And that there is a solution if you get it, catch it early enough. And I'm just so grateful for the work that you're doing. And what do you have? You mentioned going to Norway. What do you have coming up? Do you have any more trips, any books that you're planning? What should we look forward
I
from you?
just finished my eighth book.
Amazing, amazing,
And I
amazing,
just did the galley proofs with all the corrections and this last week
amazing.
and finished it up yesterday. It's called Mistakes, Mischief, and Mayhem. It's a compilation of my last 54 years working in this field, drawing from stories I've written about, stories I've spoken about. Most of it comes from my lectures on um, uh, mistakes, own it, fix it, learn from it, move on. Mischief, show them what you've done wrong, give them ownership of the problem, give ways to solve it, leave their dignity intact, and mayhem, the three R's. And so bullying is never a mistake, it's never mischief. It's always mayhem because of the destruction it can cause to another human being. But I think we need to recognize that all three of those need a form of discipline, giving life to their learning. That you say, but he just made a mistake. Discipline is not punishment. It's working with a child, not to a child. Punishment is doing something to a child. The alternative in disguise is rescuing them. Oh, my poor dear, you didn't really mean to do that kind of thing. But in discipline, if you have a very simple formula, I don't care if they're a 3-year-old or a 15-year-old or an adult, own it, fix it, learn from it, and move on whenever you make a mistake. And
That's
then
great.
with mischief, you mark on a table accidentally. That's a mistake. Another does tic-tac-toe on the table. That's mischief. Another kid carves another child's name in a gross term. That's mayhem. And so if you can figure out what a kid is doing, then you can figure out how you can help them move on from that. So I'm excited about it coming out. It'll be out in July.
That's so
Um,
exciting.
yeah, it is for me. And then I'll be doing a conference in New Zealand with all administrators, which is so exciting because they all come together. The Maoris perform amazing
Oh,
rituals to open it up, and I've quoted some Maoris in my bullying book, and uh, just being able to work with administrators on things that they can go back and make a difference. Can I share with you a quote?
Please
I
do.
put it in my book, in
Please
my
do.
genocide book. Um, it's not the function of history to drum ethical lessons into our brains. The only thing one can learn from history is that actions have consequences and that certain choices once made are irretrievable. So we have to act with integrity and civility and compassion. That's how I started my genocide book. And that is from The Creation of Patriarchy,
Amazing.
which is Gerda Lerner. She's a phenomenal writer. So,
I'll have to certainly check her out.
yeah.
Amazing.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. I'll say goodbye to you after we stop
And
recording,
you
but
know
it's
what?
been wonderful, Barbara.
I will make sure you have an electronic copy of the Bully, Not So Innocent Bystander, and also the Extraordinary Evil handout.
Thank you so much, Barbara. It was so great. It's so great speaking
Thank
with you
you.
today.